Okay, and okay. Oh man, I swear I'm never letting them schedule me 2 classes back to back ever again. Just impossible to make it early. Okay. Oh, actually, decent number compared to my other class. Wait, dang it, why did my projection turn off? Okay, there we go. Oh, happy day. Okay, what were we talking about? All right, so I hope you all had a great reading week. How was my reading week? Complete and total disaster from beginning to end, which begins with my fridge dying. I know, the worst. Paying $115 for someone to come in for 5 minutes and tell me I need a new fridge, which I probably should have guessed, but still. And then paying, $2,000 for a new fridge, which is super fun. Love spending my money that way. And then ends basically with me spending 2.5 days with a friend of mine in the ER and at different hospitals. He's basically some kind of infection in his knee. His knee is the size of a cantaloupe. It's horrible. And he's still waiting for emergency surgery 3 days later. So Canada's healthcare system, or Alberta's, I don't know, maybe Canada's is better on the whole. Alberta's healthcare system is amazing, right? It'll keep you from dying, but not much beyond that. They didn't offer him MAID, so I guess that's a plus. All right, so it was not the best, but that's okay. I hope you all had a great reading week. Okay, so we're talking about deviance and crime, right? That is where we are heading into. Winky, okay. That is, I don't know what to make of that question. Did I have personal fun? No. Okay, I don't know what you're asking. It sounds dirty, but I don't know aside from that. Okay, so we're talking about deviance and crime, right? We left this off prior to reading week, kind of trying to get into, the symbolic interactionist approach to deviance and crime. And basically, settle. I can hear you talking. It's very distracting. All right. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. So the symbolic interactionist kind of view on deviance and crime is basically that deviance and crime are fundamentally learned, right? That basically people, because we shape our own social circumstances, people fundamentally are shaped into their deviance by the people around them. So, basically for an interactionist, right, if you want to figure out, where deviance comes from and potentially how you might avoid deviance, right, how you might keep people from violating norms, you basically want to look at the circumstances that promote deviant or criminal roles. Right, so if you look at the criminology literature, one of the big things that you see is that there's a big focus, especially with young people, right, on making sure that they're never introduced to things like antisocial peers, right? That if you want to keep people from becoming deviant, you need to keep them away from other people who are fundamentally deviant themselves. Now this becomes hard because if you have things like poor attachment, right, you have bad role models, you have bad parenting, you have any of these, poor performance in an educational setting, so poor relationships with teachers, people do tend to move into people who are like them and people who give them positive feedback on things they're doing. And often this can be in kind of antisocial roles. So symbolic interactionism has usually focused in criminology on trying to keep people out of these antisocial roles. Okay. So, I guess I left off on this on the Friday, but I'll just kind of review it really quickly because I think it's interesting. And I went through it really fast, so I just want to touch on it again for 2 seconds. One of the things that, let's say, one interactionist, this guy, Howard Becker, stressed back in the 1960s, when marijuana use was still considered pretty deviant, and any kind of drug use, any kind of substance use, right? Whether it's when you learn to drink, whether it's when you learn to take drugs in a way that makes you feel good, right? That it's all basically learned, that you learn it from other people. So it goes, in his study of marijuana use, right, it went through 3 basic steps. Okay, the first one is from people who have smoked marijuana before, learning to smoke it in a way that produces a real effect. So rather than just huffing on it and coughing up a bunch and then never touching it again, people will teach you how to use it. I don't know. I've never smoked weed, so I have absolutely no idea. I'm the worst person to talk to about this. Hold it in, or however you smoke weed, in the way that you're going to get the best effect, right? Then step 2, learning to recognize the effects and then connect it with the drugs. So, right, whatever sensation comes from smoking marijuana, how pleasurable it is, how to kind of maximize it, recognizing that the drug is having an effect. People will walk you through what it is like to smoke weed, and then you learn to enjoy that sensation rather than potentially getting freaked out by it. Now, this is specific to marijuana use, but symbolic interactionists will do this kind of work with all forms of deviance to look at how people are taught deviant behavior. Whether it is, deviant sexual behavior, or whether it's crime, right, committing crimes, how to walk through a crime, how to commit crimes and not get caught. All of these things are, for symbolic interactionists, fundamentally learned, because no one is born and grows up to be deviant. Those behaviors are instilled by someone. So even deviance has a social component for symbolic interactionists. Okay, so learning any criminal or deviant behavior needs a social context. For one thing, outside of a social context, nothing in itself for sociologists is fundamentally deviant or criminal. It's only within a social context that things are defined as criminal or deviant. But yeah, in other cases, experienced deviants or criminals teach people the tricks of the trade. And this is why, sometimes you'll hear criminologists kind of in passing refer to prison as criminal university. Why? Because if you send someone to prison, all of a sudden they are going to be in contact with a lot of other people who also commit crimes. And one of the things that tends to happen is they share tricks of the trade. They form social bonds, they share tricks of the trade, and then, they may get younger people or people who aren't otherwise criminal or deviant involved in that through their social influence. So teaching them how to steal, teaching them how to avoid police, all of these things for interactionists are all built in a kind of social setting. And the more connections you have with people who are deviant or criminal, the more likely you are yourself to eventually embody these traits, right? To learn these skills and become criminal or deviant at the end of the day. And the more you're exposed to them, the greater a chance, which is why, you'll see kind of patterns. People who spend a lot of time, with people who are deviant, people who are criminal, will tend in that direction. And it's just a kind of natural social process. You tend to shift your behavior and your beliefs into alignment with the people that you are most closely connected to. If those people happen to be antisocial, or deviant or criminal, you're going to shift in that direction as well. This is why, and I think I said this last time, one of the foundations of our newest piece of youth criminal justice legislation, the Youth Criminal Justice Act, has diversion as one of its key goals. And diversion is meant, I'll just write it on the slide here, the Youth Criminal Justice Act, or the YCJA. One of the key goals is diversion. So instead of sending, some young person who, goes to Walmart and shoplifts a sweater, or I don't know, whatever you shoplift at Walmart, I don't even know. Instead of putting that person in prison, where they're likely to encounter a lot of other youth involved in crime and form connections with antisocial peers, you divert them out of the criminal justice system, you give them community service, you put them in reparative therapy, you put them in therapy, right? I like the British approach. There's a particular British approach that's like, your kid, your 16-year-old shoplifted PlayStation from Walmart. So dad and mom, you get to go to therapy and get parenting classes on how to parent your young person better. I like this kind of a weird approach that the British have undertaken, but I kind of like it because it's recognizing that this deviance probably came from somewhere and it may have come from bad attachment to parents and therefore attachment to, say, antisocial peers. Okay. So one of the theories that comes out of symbolic interactionism as it relates to deviant or criminal behavior is called labeling theory. So labeling theory basically says that deviance results not so much from actions, from the actions of the deviant, but from how other people respond to it, right? So it's at the end of the day, it's not so much that you did something that was deviant, it's that society reacts to it as deviant that makes that act deviant. Now, part of I think this is a view with considerable virtue, in the sense that it explains to an extent how there can be social change in what people consider deviant. Basically, if you're in a society where something is considered deviant, you'll be, if you engage in that behavior, you'll be treated as deviant, but those definitions can change over time. So think of, same-sex relationships as an example of this. If you went back to the 1950s, right, same-sex relationships between men or between women would have been considered deviant. If you fast forward to today, and if you were a gay man or a lesbian and you were open about your relationships, you would have been treated as deviant. You might have even been put in prison. If you fast forward to today, we've changed that definition. So that behavior is no longer seen, at least for the most part, as deviant because the social definition has changed. So for symbolic interactionists, they will say, right, no act is deviant in and of itself. It's in the reaction socially that deviance is defined and basically ultimately occurs, right? It's when people treat you as deviant. So yeah, it's not applied automatically. It's only applied when, a person engages in rule breaking or rule violating behavior, and those rules can change over time. They can be redefined in different kind of historical periods. Okay. So, yeah, symbolic interactionists, they are focusing principally on this idea, that you learn and you label deviant, like people learn deviant behavior, and deviant behavior is labeled socially. Functionalists are a little bit different, right? So functionalists have a different view of deviance. And basically, again, if you're talking functionalists, always think about the fact that they are thinking about social equilibrium. And so when a functionalist sees deviance, what a functionalist is ultimately going to think is that deviant or criminal behavior either serves a social purpose or it is the result of some kind of social dysfunction that basically leads people into deviance, right? So let's think about, let's say, and functionalists will tend to think of crime in a lot of cases as related to poverty. I think more strongly than is actually warranted if you look at the statistics. But functionalists might look at, say, the economy and say the economy basically is not fulfilling its social function if there are people who are so poor that they feel they have to commit crimes in order to support themselves. So criminal or deviant behavior comes from a kind of dysfunction, right? A social dysfunction in the economy, right? People commit crimes because of that basic kind of social dysfunction. And you can think of, other places where people are, engaging in deviant behavior. If people are doing drugs, right? If they are engaging in, these kinds of deviant behaviors, a functionalist would think, what is the social structure that's failing these people, that's leading them to feel like they need to use drugs? What, you might look to say meaning in life. What meaning is missing in people's lives that they feel like they have to do drugs to get by, right? To get through their day, or whatever it has to be. Is it a dysfunction in family? Is it a dysfunction in the social welfare system, the economy? or whatever it happens to be. This tends to be the way functionalists think. Okay. I still hear you there. Shh. Okay. I love this picture. Why? Because Durkheim looks like the kind of guy who puts the fun in functionalism. Durkheim makes a kind of really controversial claim about deviance that I think is really, really important. And there's the entire possibility that you'll find a test question based on this principle on the exam. So I think it's something you should understand. What Durkheim says, and what a lot of functionalists have also said, is that a certain amount of deviance in a society or crime is actually good for society and essentially necessary. What Durkheim says is basically, in society, you have a lot of rules. There are a lot of rules set up, but a lot of them are sort of unstated. They're social rules. They're established, essentially by shared social norms. And a lot of times, it's not written down and people aren't aware of them, except in kind of social relations. So what Durkheim says is that crime and deviance actually serve a really important social function, specifically that they tend to let us know where the boundaries are. So when you see something that, someone acting in a deviant way, and then that person receives some kind of social punishment, right? Whether it is, I'm trying to think. Whether it is like a snarky look or a nasty comment, right? You're at a restaurant and someone's mistreating the waitress, and that person gets a snappy comment from someone at the other table saying, cut that stuff out. You can't treat people that way. Or whether it's, you're back in the 17th century and you steal a horse and you're hanged, right? And that happens out in public. All of these things for Durkheim, though, serve the purpose of letting people know what the boundaries are. So basically, you can't know what the boundaries are unless someone transgresses them and then is punished. And that punishment basically lets you know how far you can go, right? So it can essentially, the fact that some people are deviant, some people are criminal, establishes those social boundaries and lets the rest of us know what they are, right? So when you open Twitter or X or whatever it's called now, or whatever you use to get your news, and you see that there was a murder in Northwest Edmonton, and the police have arrested the person, and that person is now facing life in prison, or whatever it happens to be. For Durkheim, that murder served the social purpose of letting you know that if you kill someone, you will go to prison, right? That is not the right thing to do. And when you hear, other stories about deviance, or you see people being treated in particular ways for deviance, you then know what the social boundaries are, right? If someone, defaces like a pride flag or something like that, and then they get a negative social response, and you see it on Reddit, right? People are denouncing this person. You realize then that what you can do with this particular symbol. These are all things, or you hear about someone burning the American flag and receiving no punishment, you then know that that's not deviant. Because all of these things are established socially in major ways, we need people to kind of push the limits and test it so that we ultimately know what we get. Okay, it can also result for Durkheim in positive social change in the sense that once people know what the norms and limits are, they can bring their behavior into alignment with those norms and limits, and ultimately, reduce the amount of deviant or criminal behavior that's disrupting society. Okay, I think do I have my crazy chart of strain theory. Strain theory is a fun one. Absolute classic. Let's talk about strain theory. So strain theory is another form of a functionalist theory about why deviance occurs. Oh, hang on a sec. I'm just gonna, it's kind of hard to see that on your screen. Give me half a sec. I'm gonna redesign this slide in real time because I occasionally make them, they look really nice on my end, and then you can't see them that well. Okay, there we go. That'll look better. Okay, yeah. Now you can't see anything. Short puppety. There we go. Okay, so strain theory. All right, high contrast, much better. Okay, so strain theory is a particular part of functionalist thought about deviance. And basically, so it comes from a guy named Merton. And basically what Merton says is that people turn to deviance when they experience strain. And what is strain for Merton? Well, basically, strain happens when what you're expecting to get out of society, what you think is going to come to you, typically in terms of material success or status or any of these things that we all want, right? We all want to live nice lives. You want your house in the suburbs. You want to probably either get married or have a partner, maybe have, well, I mean, with Gen Z, increasingly it's like half a kid, but whatever, or a plant or a cat, but whatever. Less and less Gen Z people want to have kids, so I have to adjust my metaphor. I used to be like white picket fence, 2.5 kids. It's more like a Gen X thing. Now it's like apartment somewhere, plant and cat that the cat is your fur baby, and that's how it goes. Anyway, not ragging on Gen Z. So basically, strain theory says that when there are social expectations about what you want to get out of life, right? You want wealth, you want status, you want romantic relationships. When that doesn't happen, basically you fall into some kind of deviance. Okay, so here's an example in terms of strain theory, where I think this functionalist approach could be used to explain a particular social phenomenon without necessarily endorsing the ideology behind it. You've heard of incels, right? These involuntary celibates, right? Which are typically men who are unable to find women who are willing to engage in sexual relationships with them, right? So the incels have a particular social expectation, right? That that they are somehow entitled, or that society has promised that if they go through and do certain things, right, get a job, shave occasionally, leave your parents' basement. Sorry, I'm being glib. I'm sorry. That you will, you'll find a willing sexual partner. Especially, as we get into the period of hookup culture, where sort of the social script, you see it in movies, you see it on television or wherever, that's pretty easy to find someone to sleep with you. When people don't get that, they experience what Merton would think of as a strain, right? A disconnect between their expectation of the world and the reality that the world is actually given them, right? They expected that they would find, women willing to sleep with them, and when that doesn't happen, they experience a strain, right? Something they thought that society was going to provide them, but that society fails to provide enough of, right? So we've typically thought of this in terms of wealth, right? It's like you think you're going to get a great middle-class job and do really well, and be able to buy that house and go on that tropical vacation or whatever. But you can think of it as other things too, like sex in the case of incels. So not enough legitimate opportunity to succeed leads to people entering some form of deviance. With incels, I think it's writing posts on 4chan about how women are the worst or something. I don't even know. This is all I know about incels right here in this lecture. But that's basically, you can think of, incels through this lens of strain theory and kind of explain that behavior. I'm not legitimizing what they say. Their thinking is totally out of whack. But you could explain the phenomenon. They think they're promised something by society. When they don't get it, they experience a form of strain, and they feel as though they haven't gotten something that they desire, so they become deviant. Maybe they join a subculture. They, start saying terrible things online or in person, whatever it happens to be, right? It's a form of strain. Can't believe no one has a comment about my incels example. Okay, I know it's snowy. Everybody hates being here. All good. Okay, so Merton's strain theory of deviance. We can break it down basically into different, so I'll explain this kind of square, and trust me, you'll want to know this. There's definitely going to be midterm questions that ask you, it'll give you like a little vignette. Be like, Ted, went to college. Ted graduated from college and went to work at a white-collar firm, got married to his college sweetheart, Mary. What square on this chart does Ted represent? Okay, So I'll explain basically what Merton has set up here in a couple of ways. Is there a question slide right after this? Oh, there should be. I'll have to go back because this always confuses people, but I think it's pretty straightforward. Okay, so basically what Merton says is that there's two essential kind of axes upon which we find the kind of social role that people either move into deviance or don't move into deviance based on how they kind of fit this axis. All right, so you have two things here. So you have cultural goals and you have institutionalized means. Okay, what is a cultural goal? Okay, so what does the culture tell you you're supposed to do? Sometimes people use the term like social scripts or cultural scripts. But what are you supposed to do with your life, right? What is the thing that you're supposed to strive for in the particular society that you live in? So arguably, in the society that we live in, one of the accepted or the cultural goals is things like material success, right? You want money, you want, you probably want a romantic partner of some kind, you want to own property, because that's what you've been told to do, right? You've been told that that is the way to a good life. Or if it is, buy a cat, travel the world, right? Become they call them dinks, dual income, no kids, right? You find a partner, you don't have children, and you use all of that extra money you have to, travel on your European vacation twice a year, whatever it happens to be, right? There are cultural goals that we all sort of have been indoctrinated with since we were really little. Like, how do you live a good life? That's the cultural goals. And then, so you have kind of two choices according to Merton. You can either accept those cultural goals or you can reject them. Then there are the institutionalized means. So, if you want to get the cultural goal, right? You want to get here. You want your white picket fence, your house with a front drive garage, your 2 cars, your dog, maybe your children, or maybe the dog is your child. I don't know. Increasingly, the world is a confusing place to me. My Gen Z colleague at the Center for Criminological Research told me that plants are the new pets, pets are the new children, and children are the new Ferraris. And I guess that kind of makes sense. But children being a luxury product seemed weird to me. But I'm old, so that's okay. So you want to get the cultural goals. How does society tell you to get it? It tells you that there is a certain life path that you should take to get it. So let's say, typical middle class Canadian cultural goals, right? You want to live a good life. You want to be relatively wealthy. You want to travel. All of these, you want to retire when you're 65. All of that stuff. How does society tell you to get that? Well, I would argue that one of the things it would say is you have to get an undergraduate degree. You have to get good grades. You have to go work for, either be an entrepreneur or go work for a mega corporation that pays you lots and lots of money, right? These are the institutional means. Like, the means are the how. How do you get to the cultural goal? And again, there are certain social scripts that the culture tells you. How do you do this? How do you not do it, right? And you can either accept them or reject them, just like the cultural goals. Okay, so with that on the table, just think about it like that. So, when we talk about, the top box here, right? We got in blue, conformity. What does that look like? So conformity for Merton looks like you've accepted the cultural goals, right? So let's say you want to get wealthy, you want to have a relationship with a romantic partner, you want to build that middle class lifestyle. And how did you go about trying to get that? You went about trying to get that by going to university, getting an undergraduate degree, getting a job, and all of that stuff. So you are in conformity, right? You conform with both the institutional means and the cultural goal. Okay, so that's conformity. The red square. Okay, so the red square is innovation, right? Now, in the red square, you want this, right? You want the cultural goal. So red square, you want the cultural goal. However, you're not necessarily going to go about this in the accepted cultural way. So you can think of like Elon Musk, right? Elon Musk, maybe not the perfect example, right? But he's sort of an innovator. He goes about things in different ways, but you could think of Bill Gates as well, right? In this kind of frame. So what's different about, say, Bill Gates? Well, Bill Gates wanted to get rich, but he dropped out of Harvard. He found, instead of staying in school, getting that degree, he founds his own company, and he, creates Microsoft, and he gets rich. The other people you might think of in innovation, potentially, oops, sorry, I wrote the wrong letter. Let me get my eraser out. I was going to write Al Capone, but I figured that would probably take too long, and I'm actually less convinced than I feel I should be that you know who that is. But let's say, criminals. Right, so The Sopranos, Tony Soprano, or the guy from Breaking Bad, I can't remember his name, played by Bryan Cranston, but I can't remember the character's name because I never really watched Breaking Bad. What do you want? You want that cultural goal, right? You want wealth, you want security, you want nice cars, you want social respect. But instead of going about it by going to school, working hard, getting a job, doing things legitimately through the path that everybody tells you should, you do it in a less legitimate way, right? You don't follow that typical script of how you get wealth. So you fall into the category of innovation. And same thing with criminals, right? Especially criminals who are trying to get very wealthy, mob bosses and such, they're still after wealth, right? In a lot of cases, they have families, they have sort of social respect, at least in some way, but they haven't gone about it in the typical way. Okay, hang on. How are we doing so far? I'll answer. Yeah, Walter White. Yes, you're right. I'm sorry. I totally forgot that. What are my thoughts about this? This is clearly true. It allows more antisocial or deviant behavior because, yeah, you can do it kind of in secret with avatars. Like, you can be a total jerk to people on, I was thinking of a different word, the people on Twitter, X, whatever it's called, without any consequences. Is there going to be more opportunities to view midterm one? If you want to view it, let me know. Send me an email and we'll book a time. Okay. All right, so that's, hopefully we've got, conformity and innovation. I know it's a long time on one slide, but there's like 5 concepts on this slide that are, 7 concepts on this slide that are important, so we got to get it right. Okay, so when we get into ritualism, right? Ritualism, basically, you've rejected the cultural goals, but you're still accepting the institutional means, right? So you're kind of here. So what does this mean, and what would this look like? Essentially, when you get into ritualism, you can think of it as going through the motions. You might not be convinced that you can succeed in life, right? You might not ever believe that you're going to get wealthy, but instead of just abandoning hope and doing something, totally giving up, you keep going through the motions, right? So you could be like my friend's ex, just working a part-time job at Michael's. Nothing wrong with it, perfectly honorable, but basically she does not really think that working at Michael's is going to get her, that dream of having the nice car or the, the nice house or anything like that. She's just going through the motions, right? She continues to feed herself. She continues to kind of move through life's paces. But she's given up on the idea of building a really great middle-class life. It's just like, I'm going to work at Michael's till I die. Or something, maybe killed by a pile of glitter falling on her. That's probably the death that you get at Michael's. That's what I'm going to go with. Or you're accidentally built into a picture frame and suffocate. I don't know. I'm trying to think of hilarious deaths at Michael's. That's ritualism, right? You've basically given up on this, right? You've given up on the idea of money, of money, status, wealth, whatever the good life is, the tropical vacations, and you're just going through the motions. You're alive, but you don't believe in the story of the American dream anymore. But you keep going to work because you still have to feed yourself, and you just keep going through the motions. Okay, so that's ritualism. I think ritualism is pretty easy to explain. Retreatism. So there's a couple ways that you could be a retreatist. Essentially, at retreatism, you're no longer, doing the institutional means or the cultural goal. So you've basically given up on both. So probably this looks like the 35-year-old person who lives in mom's basement, consumes a lot of pornographic material, plays a lot of video games, doesn't have a job, doesn't have any outlook on getting a job or, really moving into life in a serious way, right? They've retreated from both the cultural goal and the institutionalized means. So they are just out, right? They're out of society. They're still alive, but they're not participating in any meaningful way in the way that we would usually think people build a life. Even just a life of getting by, right? They're totally outside of that system. Okay, and the last one, I'm sorry, I know this is a lot on one slide. The last one is rebellion. So, what happens with rebellion? And, Foucault kind of talks about this a little bit, though he's not talking about strain theory specifically, but Foucault talks about, what amounts to rebellion as essentially what we would look at as madness, right? As insanity, because you've got a new means and a new goal, right? You've rejected all of this, and you're creating something totally new. So you can have a couple ways that this works, right? So you can think of like, if you know kind of history, communist revolutionaries like the Bolsheviks, right? Your Lenins, your Trotskys and them, in this kind of phase of rebellion, right? They have a new goal, which is an egalitarian society where everyone has what they need, and a new means to get there, which is murder the bourgeoisie, take over the means of production, and take control of that society, right? So they are in rebellion against, say, if you want to talk about this part as like bourgeois, Marx's idea of bourgeois society, the people here would be against bourgeois society, right? They want a new goal, an equal society, and the new means is communism or whatever it happens to be. The other one that sometimes people kind of vibe with in terms of explanations is the Joker from the Dark Knight movie, right? The Joker, right? What's his goal? He just wants chaos, right? He has a new goal. His goal is to just have social chaos, and his means is just to kill people and destroy things in as great an amount as possible, right? If you've ever seen The Dark Knight, hopefully you have, it's a pretty decent movie. The Joker burns a giant pile of money. Why? Because gas is cheap, right? Gas and dynamite and all that stuff is cheap. He doesn't need a lot of money. He's not interested in wealth. He's not committing crimes like the other criminals in that film, which would all be kind of in the innovation kind of sphere. He wants to watch in Alfred's words, right? He just wants to watch the world burn. And that's what we have in rebellion, right? Is people with totally different goals. And a lot of times it looks like madness to people that are in, especially in these three kind of spaces. All right. Where do I think I'm situated on this diagram? Folks, I'm right in here. I did all the things I was supposed to do. I'm vanilla ice cream, super boring. While I may be super boring, I'm still the top selling flavor of ice cream, so we're gonna go with that. I don't know what I mean by that metaphor, just don't take it too far, okay? Definitely, get a PhD, definitely you're in conformity. Lots of us think we're here, like lots of professors act like they're rebels and they're like so cool. They're all here though, so don't buy the spin. No, definitely it's like, I want to change the world, but not really. Really, they just want to be rich. I know enough professors who drive nice cars. Okay, sorry. That's what I mean. I'm being bad, mean to myself. Okay, I'll answer that. Like, what do I mean by reject or accept the goals? Right, so, sorry, do you want, let's say the cultural goal, right, is you want to get wealthy, right? You want to live that nice middle-class lifestyle or, with a nice car, a nice house, a nice hardwood floor. all that stuff that we tend to think of as the good life. If you reject that cultural goal, right, you don't care about that. You're like, I don't care, I'll live in this apartment, I'm fine with being poor, or I'm not aspiring anymore to that wealth. I don't think it's possible. So you've kind of moved into this space where you're not pursuing what people would want here, here and here, right? Which is the typical things that we think of that make for living a good life. All right. Okay. Can I clarify retreatism from rebellion? Retreatism is giving up. Retreatism is really giving up on both the way to get through life and what you want out of life. It's just giving up. Rebellion is more like, I don't like what's on offer from the mainstream, and I'm going to create my whole new path. And so this top part is actually kind of interesting, right? If you want to go off and live in the woods, and I actually had friends, and actually one of my decent acquaintances, used to be a really good friend, has essentially done this. You know, they had a great job, a prominent position, great salary, and somewhere in the middle of COVID, they kind of, I was going to say they went insane. And it's kind of true, but kind of not. They decided that they were going to buy, 20 acres north of Athabasca and essentially go off the grid. And I think they're now selling artisanal goat cheese or something. Right, and their point is not, I mean, they had the BMW. They had a crappy car though, but whatever. I have mechanic friends who are like, yeah, never buy a German car. They break a lot. And the parts are super expensive. So that's why I say they're not great. They had the BMW. They had, a really nice house. And they were trending in this direction of conformity. And then, somewhere in the middle of COVID, they bought a bunch of land north of Athabasca, bought some livestock, and totally went off the grid, got rid of their cell phone, deleted their social media, and basically they're just like, basically living in the woods, which is great. She's super happy about it too. Like I talked to her a couple weeks ago on a landline. Oh my God. But yeah, I mean, basically, she's cool. Her name is Pearl. She's a very cool person. Artisanal goat cheese. I'm not sure if it's goat cheese, but probably. But that's, she's not really in retreat because she's still supporting. She's just come up with a new goal, and what she wants is to live off the land, to get off the grid, to be self-sustaining, to get off the refrigeration bubble. This is one thing that she talked about, was like the refrigeration bubble is going to end, so we really need to learn to can food. I'm like, if the refrigeration bubble ends, I'm just going to die. I'm sorry. It's not, I'm not going to learn to can tomatoes. I know it's not hard. I just don't want to. And I have a propensity for killing plants in my garden, so I will starve to death. Or I will raid her house, and hopefully she'll support me. But yeah, that's like going off the grid is more rebellion than retreatism. Retreatism is just kind of giving up. Okay. I think I clarified all that. How are we doing for time? I know I drew on this slide like 4 times and I keep erasing it. I'm sorry. Okay. Oh, I got 3 minutes. Yeah, subcultures take a sec. Let's pick up on here on Wednesday. We'll let you go a couple minutes early because there's a few things to talk about in terms of subcultures in these kind of ways, functionalist ways of thinking. So we'll pick it up there. Make sure you know that Merton strain theory, those 5 quadrant squares. There will definitely be questions on that on the exam. So make sure you feel comfortable with them. Bring questions next time if you don't. All right, we'll see you on Wednesday.